The entire room fell silent as George slammed his hand on the conference table. His face flushed crimson against his crisp white collar. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned faces of my colleagues. "Due to consistent underperformance and client complaints." I stood frozen, my presentation still glowing on the screen behind me. The quarterly results showing my division had exceeded targets by 32%. The division I had built from nothing. "This can't be right," I managed to say, my voice smaller than intended. "I just closed the Archer account yesterday. That's a 14 million deal." George's daughter, Pia, stepped forward from where she'd been leaning against the wall. Her perfectly manicured hand rested on her father's shoulder as she gave me a look of practiced sympathy. "Veronica handled that account, actually," she corrected, her voice honey-sweet. "She's been instrumental in developing our new approach to enterprise clients." The room swam before my eyes. My approach, my client, my 5 years of work. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items," George continued, nodding toward the door where 2 guards suddenly materialized. "Your building access has been terminated," someone whispered. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their chair. No one made eye contact with me. "Congratulations are in order, by the way," George added, his voice brightening as he turned to address the room. "Thanks to Pia's innovative sales framework, we've officially crossed the 100 million threshold this quarter." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then building as people realized keeping their jobs meant playing along. Through the wall of sound, I watched Pia accept congratulations with practiced modesty. "She's the future of this company," George proclaimed proudly. As security guided me toward the elevator, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors. Face pale, eyes wide with shock. 5 years of my life, my innovative methodology, my client relationships, all stolen in an instant. In the lobby, rain pounded against the windows as I clutched the small cardboard box containing my desk plant and framed credentials. The security guard awkwardly handed me my coat. "Sorry," he mumbled, before stepping back into the elevator. Standing alone in that vast marble lobby, watching raindrops race down the windows like tears, something hardened inside me. The humiliation crystallized into something else entirely. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Veronica?" a deep voice asked. "This is William from the board of directors. We need to meet immediately. There's been a situation with the Archer account." I stared at the phone, then back at the elevator that had just carried away my dignity. "When and where?" I asked. If you're feeling that knot in your stomach, that burning sense of injustice, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear how this unfolds because believe me, when people steal what you've built, justice has a way of finding them. Comment if you've ever watched someone take credit for your work. I'm about to show you what happens when they pick the wrong person to betray. My name is Veronica Wade. At 34, I was the youngest person to ever make senior sales director at my company. At least until Pia arrived. Growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat taught me 2 valuable lessons. Work harder than everyone else, and never expect recognition for it. While other kids got summer vacations, I got summer jobs. While college classmates partied, I studied behavioral economics and psychology, fascinated by what makes people tick and what makes them buy. I cultivated a calm demeanor that hid my strategic mind. I learned to read people, their hesitations, their unspoken concerns, their decision-making patterns. I built this skill into a methodology that transformed how we approached high-value clients. When I joined the company 5 years ago, we were struggling to hit 10 million in annual revenue. I spent 18-hour days building relationships, analyzing data, and perfecting my approach. By my 3rd year, my division alone brought in 45 million. Then George hired his daughter. Pia arrived 6 months ago with her designer clothes and business school theories. 26 years old with 0 real-world experience, but the unshakable confidence of someone who's never faced consequences. Her father introduced her as our new strategic innovation consultant. She'll be shadowing various departments to learn the business from the ground up, George had announced proudly during her introduction. Pia graduated top of her class from business school and turned down offers from several major competitors to join our family here. Everyone clapped. I smiled politely and returned to my work. 2 days later, she appeared at my office door. "Daddy says you're the best," she said, leaning against my doorframe. "He says if I want to understand this business, I should learn from you." Looking back, I should have noticed how her eyes cataloged everything in my office, the client files, the strategy documents, my notebook of meeting notes, but I was flattered and foolish. Happy to help, I replied. For weeks, she followed me everywhere, to client meetings where she observed how I tailored presentations to address each decision-maker's specific concerns, to strategy sessions where I explained my methodology for identifying client pain points before they voiced them. She took notes constantly, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning. You're incredible at this, she told me after watching me close a particularly difficult deal. The way you knew exactly what objection that CFO would raise before he even opened his mouth. How do you do that? Pride loosened my lips. I explained my framework in detail, the behavioral indicators I watched for, the subtle shifts in language that revealed underlying concerns, the tailored responses I had developed for each personality type. I've never seen anything like it, she said, eyes wide with what I mistook for admiration. Would you mind if I recorded our next strategy session? Just for my own learning. The first change came subtly. My weekly strategy meeting with George was rescheduled without notice. When I asked his assistant about it, she seemed uncomfortable. Pia had some ideas she wanted to present to her father first, she explained hesitantly. They thought it would be more efficient this way. Then my access to our client database was temporarily restricted due to system updates. When restored, I noticed several of my highest value clients had been reassigned to team accounts. One morning, I arrived to find a group gathered around Pia in the conference room. Through the glass, I could see my own slides projected on the screen, the same deck I had developed to explain my sales methodology, with the title changed to Pia's Enterprise Framework for Decision Acceleration. When I entered, the conversation halted. Veronica, George beamed. Pia was just sharing her innovative approach to enterprise sales. Absolutely groundbreaking stuff. That's my presentation, I said quietly. Those are my slides. The room grew uncomfortably silent. Well, Pia laughed lightly. Great minds think alike, I guess. But this framework comes from my business school research combined with what I've observed here. I looked around the room, searching for anyone who would acknowledge the truth. Everyone studied their notepads intently. George, could I speak with you privately? I asked. We're in the middle of something important, he replied, his smile never wavering. Let's catch up later. But later never came. My emails went unanswered. My meeting requests were declined. Meanwhile, Pia began appearing in my client meetings, no longer as an observer, but as a participant. I'll be taking point on the Anderson presentation, she informed me one morning. Dad thinks it's time I started handling some key accounts independently. I watched helplessly as my clients were systematically transferred to her portfolio. When I tried to raise concerns with HR, I was told it was a strategic reallocation of resources. When I approached other executives, they offered sympathetic looks, but no support. Then came the quarterly meeting where Pia presented her breakthrough with the Archer account, the client I had been cultivating for over a year, using the precise approach I had developed and explained to her in detail. Using my framework, I identified the underlying concerns that had prevented Archer from committing previously, she explained to the executive team. By addressing their unspoken objections about implementation timelines, we were able to secure their business. The room erupted in applause while I sat silently, my hands trembling beneath the table. After the meeting, I confronted George directly. That was my client, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. That was my methodology. You know this. His expression hardened. Are you suggesting my daughter is lying? I'm stating a fact. Everything she presented today was my work. I'm stating a fact. Everything she presented today. I'm stating a fact. I'm stating a fact. Veronica, he sighed, his tone suddenly patronizing. I understand it might be difficult to see younger talent rise quickly, but Pia has brought fresh energy and ideas that have revitalized our approach. Fresh ideas? I repeated incredulously. She copied my entire framework. That's enough. His voice dropped dangerously. Be very careful about making accusations you can't substantiate. Very careful indeed. I should have seen what was coming next. The impossible targets, the client complaints that mysteriously appeared in my file, the critical performance review filled with fabricated shortcomings, and finally, the public humiliation of being escorted from the building while the company celebrated Pia's ascension to 100 million in sales, using my methodology, my client relationships, my work. As William from the board had requested, I waited at a quiet restaurant downtown, still wearing the clothes I'd been fired in, still clutching my small box of personal items. The door opened, and an imposing man in his 60s approached my table. "Veronica," he said, extending his hand. "I'm William. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." I settled into my chair, studying William's face. Silver-haired and sharp-eyed, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who rarely needed to raise his voice to be heard. "I'm afraid I don't have much to celebrate," I said, gesturing to my box of belongings on the chair beside me. William signaled for the waiter. "Scotch, neat," he ordered before turning to me. "And for you?" "The same." He waited until our drinks arrived before speaking again. "I'll be direct. 3 hours ago, Gregory Archer called me personally. He's threatening to pull their entire $40 million account." I nearly choked on my scotch. "What happened?" "Your replacement happened." William took a careful sip. "Apparently, Pia couldn't answer basic questions about the implementation strategy. When Gregory asked about certain aspects of the behavioral economics approach that had convinced him to sign, she stumbled through vague explanations that made no sense." A small flicker of satisfaction warmed my chest. Gregory has an economics background. He would notice immediately if someone was bluffing. He more than noticed. He asked specifically about you, saying the strategy had your fingerprints all over it. When told you were no longer with the company, he demanded to know why. William leaned forward. That prompted some digging on my part. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation around us, but all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "I've spent the afternoon reviewing email records, presentation files, and meeting notes," William continued. "It appears there's been a misattribution of intellectual property within our organization." "That's a polite way of putting it. The board has concerns about recent management decisions," he said, choosing his words with precision. "George's leadership has produced results, but at what appears to be a significant ethical cost." I let out a bitter laugh. "I've spent 5 years building something valuable, only to watch someone else take credit for it overnight. Ethical cost doesn't begin to cover it." William nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me about your methodology. The real one, not the version currently being presented by others." For the next hour, I walked him through my framework, explaining how I combined behavioral economics principles with practical sales techniques to address unspoken client concerns before they became objections. I showed him notes on my phone, explained my research, and detailed how I'd implemented the approach across different client types. William listened intently, occasionally asking incisive questions that revealed his own sharp business mind. "Impressive," he said finally, "and entirely consistent with what Gregory Archer described as the reason he signed with us." He set down his glass. "The board is prepared to make you an offer." "I'm listening." "A new division, focused on enterprise strategy, complete autonomy, reporting directly to the board, not to George, double your previous salary, plus equity." I stared at him. "And my former boss?" "We're restructuring his department. His role will be significantly reduced." "And Pia?" A thin smile crossed William's face. "She would report to you, if you find her contributions valuable." The irony was almost too perfect. "I'll need that in writing before I consider returning." "Of course. And one more thing," I added. "I want to personally explain the new arrangement to them both." William studied me for a moment. "That can be arranged." He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" I hesitated, thinking of the humiliation I'd endured, the stolen work, the smug expressions as security had escorted me out. "Not quite yet," I replied. "I need the weekend to consider. I'll give you my answer Monday morning." Walking home that night, my mind raced with possibilities. The offer was better than anything I could have expected. A vindication, a restoration, a reversal of fortune that would put me in a position of power over those who had wronged me. But something didn't feel right. Something felt too easy. I unlocked my apartment door to find my roommate Teresa sitting on our couch, surrounded by takeout containers. "I figured you might need comfort food," she said, holding up a carton of noodles. "Want to talk about it?" Teresa and I had been friends since college. She was now a journalist, with an uncanny ability to read people and situations. I collapsed beside her and recounted everything, the firing, the theft of my work, and now William's surprising offer. "That's convenient," she said when I finished, her reporter's skepticism showing. "The board member swoops in the moment you're fired with a perfect revenge scenario? You think it's too good to be true?" She shrugged. I think powerful people rarely admit they made a mistake unless they want something. What does the board really want from you? Her question haunted me all weekend. What did they really want? Why not just fire George and Pia quietly and then approach me? Why the dramatic offer? Why involve me in their restructuring at all? Sunday night, I made some calls to former colleagues who still answered my messages. What I learned changed everything. Monday morning, I arrived at William's office precisely at 9. His assistant showed me in immediately. Have you considered our offer? He asked, rising from behind his desk. I have, I replied, setting down my bag. But before I accept, I'd like to understand something. When did the board become aware of the situation with the Archer account? William's expression remained neutral. As I mentioned, Gregory called me on Friday. That's interesting, I said, because according to the meeting minutes I obtained yesterday, the board discussed concerns about the Archer implementation 3 weeks ago. Gregory had already raised questions by then. A flicker of surprise crossed William's face. You've been busy. I've also learned that the company's under investigation by the SEC for financial discrepancies that began 8 months ago, right around when George's daughter joined the company. William's eyes narrowed slightly. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? What matters is that you didn't approach me because of some sudden revelation about stolen work. You approached me because you need someone who understands the Archer account to save a $40 million deal that's about to collapse, and to potentially take the fall if the SEC investigation goes south. The room fell silent as William considered his response. Finally, he sighed. You're partially correct. The SEC situation is delicate. And yes, we need the Archer account secured immediately. But that doesn't change our offer or the fact that your work was inappropriately claimed by others. Then, let me counter with my terms, I said, sitting straighter. Triple my previous salary, 20% equity, complete autonomy over my division with a guaranteed budget, and full access to all financial records related to my clients for the past year. William's eyebrows rose. That's quite demanding. I'm quite valuable, as you've recently discovered. After a tense silence, he nodded. I'll take it to the board this afternoon. One more thing, I added. I still want to personally explain the new arrangement to George and Pia. A slow smile spread across William's face. That can definitely be arranged. 3 days later, I stood in the elevator of my former office building, this time with a visitor's badge clipped to my blazer. My heart pounded as the numbers climbed toward the executive floor. The doors opened to reveal the familiar hallway. Several employees stopped mid-conversation when they saw me, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. Veronica, my former assistant Mina hurried toward me, her eyes wide. What are you doing here? I have a meeting with George, I replied calmly. And Pia, Mina glanced nervously over her shoulder. No one told me. They're in the conference room with some board members. But, perfect, that's where I'm headed. As I approached the conference room, I could see George through the glass, gesturing emphatically at William and 2 other board members. Pia sat beside him, her posture rigid with tension. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The conversation halted immediately. George's face drained of color. Pia's mouth fell open. What is she doing here? George demanded, turning to William. I invited her, William replied smoothly. Please, Veronica, join us. I took a seat directly across from George and Pia, placing my new company contract on the table. What's going on? Pia asked, her voice higher than usual. William cleared his throat. We were just explaining to George and Pia the board's decision regarding departmental restructuring. Your timing is perfect, Veronica, as this concerns you directly. George's eyes darted between William and me. Whatever she's told you is grossly exaggerated. She's bitter about being let go for underperformance. Interesting perspective, I said, especially given that my division exceeded targets by 32% last quarter. Numbers can be manipulated, Pia interjected quickly. Dad and I discovered serious issues with her reporting methodology. I smiled thinly. You mean my sales methodology, don't you? The one you presented as your own? The one Gregory Archer specifically asked about during your meeting on Friday? Pia's face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. The board has reviewed the situation thoroughly, William interrupted, including email records, presentation files, and client feedback. We've reached some conclusions that necessitate immediate changes. George straightened in his chair. As CEO, I should have been consulted before any decisions. As CEO, you serve at the pleasure of the board. One of the other directors cut in. A board that's deeply concerned about ethical breaches and potential securities violations under your leadership. The blood drained from George's face. Securities violations? That's absurd. William slid a folder across the table. The SEC doesn't think so. They've flagged several transactions related to the Archer account and others. Transactions that coincidentally began around the time your daughter joined the company. Pia's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Those transactions were all approved through proper channels. By your father, I noted. Convenient. William turned to me. Veronica, the board has approved your terms. Would you like to explain your new position? I opened my contract and slid it toward George and Pia. Effective immediately. I'll be leading a new division as Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, reporting directly to the board. I'll have complete autonomy over enterprise accounts, including Archer. George's face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly— We can and have, William interrupted. The alternative was to disclose our findings to the SEC investigators immediately, which would likely result in criminal charges. Pia's face had gone completely white. Criminal charges? For what? Fraud, for starters, I replied calmly, along with intellectual property theft, falsification of company records, and potentially securities fraud. But the board has generously decided to handle this internally, provided certain conditions are met. What conditions? George asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled. That's what I'm here to explain. Shall we begin with your new reporting structure? The room fell silent as George and Pia stared at me, the full weight of their situation finally sinking in. In that moment, the memory of being escorted out by security flashed through my mind, the humiliation, the shock, the injustice of it all. But now, the tables had turned completely. Let's start with your performance improvement plans, I said, opening a folder of my own. We have a lot to discuss. George's jaw clenched as he stared at the performance improvement plan in front of him. This is absurd. I built this company, and I built the methodology that saved it, I replied calmly. The board recognizes that now. Pia's eyes darted between her father and me, calculating her next move. I recognized that look. I'd seen it the day she first shadowed me, silently cataloging everything she could use. We should discuss this privately, she said, touching her father's arm, with our attorneys present. William leaned forward. You're welcome to consult attorneys. However, that would necessitate the board filing our complete findings with the SEC. We're offering an internal resolution as a courtesy. The threat hung in the air. George's face had taken on an ashen quality. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I opened my tablet and turned it toward them. The board has approved a new organizational structure. George, you'll transition to a non-executive advisory role with significantly reduced compensation. Pia, you'll join the junior sales team where you'll have the opportunity to learn the business properly, under supervision. That's not acceptable, George snapped, some of his confidence returning. I have a contract. A contract that includes ethical conduct clauses, another board member interjected. Clauses you've violated repeatedly, according to our investigation. Pia straightened her spine. I've generated over 100 million in sales. You can't just demote me because of some unfounded accusations from a disgruntled employee. I smiled thinly. Those sales were generated using my methodology, my client relationships, and in many cases, my direct work. Would you like me to show you the metadata on the presentation files you claimed as your own? The original creation dates and author information are quite illuminating. Her confidence faltered visibly. You have until the end of the day to accept these terms, William stated. Otherwise, the board will pursue more formal remedies. As they left, I remained seated, watching George's rigid back and Pia's unsteady gait. After 5 days of unemployment and humiliation, the tables had turned so completely, it felt almost surreal. William turned to me. They'll fight this. I'm counting on it, I replied. The next morning, I arrived early to find my new office being prepared. Ironically, it was George's former space. The nameplate had already been changed to read Veronica Wade, Executive Vice President. Mina appeared at my door, hesitant. The team is gathered in the conference room as you requested. Thank you. Has there been any word from George or Pia? George cleared out his office last night. Pia hasn't been seen since yesterday's meeting. I nodded, unsurprised. Let's not keep everyone waiting. Walking into the conference room felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The same people who had watched my humiliation days ago now stood as I entered, their expressions a mixture of confusion, awe, and wariness. "Good morning," I began. "As you may have heard, there have been some organizational changes. I'll be leading a new division focused on enterprise strategy, reporting directly to the board." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I understand this is sudden. You have questions. You're wondering what happened with George and Pia. You're concerned about your own positions." I paused, meeting their eyes. "Those concerns are valid." The room fell silent. "Over the next week, I'll be meeting with each of you individually to discuss your roles going forward. What I value above all else is integrity and genuine contribution. Those who have both will thrive. Those who don't," I let the implication hang. As the meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a message from William. "George is demanding a meeting with the full board. Claims to have evidence of financial irregularities involving you." My heart skipped a beat. I'd expected resistance, but not a direct counterattack. What evidence could he possibly have fabricated overnight? 3 hours later, I sat in the boardroom across from George and his attorney. Pia was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency meeting," George began, his composure restored. "Yesterday's discussion caught me off guard, but I've since had time to gather relevant information the board should consider." He slid folders to each board member. "These documents show that Veronica had been systematically undermining company operations for months, presumably to position herself for exactly this kind of takeover." I kept my expression neutral as board members opened the folders. "You'll note," George continued, "that client complaint reports began appearing shortly after Veronica was informed she would be sharing accounts with my daughter. The timing suggests retaliatory fabrication." William frowned. "These complaints are from your records, George. The same records you used to justify her termination." "Exactly," George smiled. "Records I now believe she manipulated. Our IT department discovered her system credentials were used to access these files during unusual hours." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I hadn't accessed any such files, which meant someone had used my credentials without authorization. Someone like Pia. George's attorney spoke up. "Additionally, we have concerns about Miss Wade's relationship with Gregory Archer. Their communications suggest a personal connection that may violate company policy regarding client relationships." This was getting dangerous. Gregory and I had a strictly professional relationship, but any implication otherwise could damage both our reputations. "Where is Pia today?" I asked, changing the subject deliberately. George hesitated. "She's pursuing other opportunities." "That's interesting," I replied, opening my own folder, "because according to these bank records, she transferred $2.4 million to an offshore account yesterday afternoon, money that appears to have originated from company funds." The boardroom went silent. William looked sharply at me. This was information even he hadn't seen yet. "That's preposterous," George sputtered. "These documents must be falsified." "They were provided by the Financial Crimes Unit this morning," I replied, "along with records of similar transfers dating back 6 months, all authorized under your authentication codes, George." His face paled. "I never authorized any such transfers." "Perhaps not knowingly," I conceded, "but the audit trail is clear. Your credentials were used, just as you claim mine were used to access those complaint files." George's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. "There's something else the board should know," I continued, passing another document to William. "This morning, Gregory Archer contacted me about unusual language in his contract, language that doesn't match what he originally signed. The altered version would have allowed the company to claim his intellectual property under certain conditions." William studied the document, his expression darkening. "When was this change made?" "According to the metadata, 3 weeks ago, using George's system credentials." George shook his head desperately. "I didn't do this. Pia must have..." He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. "Must have what, George?" I asked quietly. "Used your credentials without authorization? Altered client contracts? Transferred company funds? Just as you accused me of misusing system access?" The room fell into tense silence as George's defense crumbled before our eyes. "Where is Pia now?" William asked. George stared at the table. "I don't know. She's not answering my calls." Over the next 2 weeks, the truth emerged in painful clarity. Pia had been systematically siphoning funds while using my methodology to boost sales figures, creating the illusion of unprecedented success. When I became an obstacle, she orchestrated my removal, never expecting I would find allies on the board. What she hadn't counted on was my meticulous documentation of my work, or my friendship with Teresa, whose investigative journalist skills had helped uncover the money trail in a single weekend. By the time international authorities located Pia at a resort in the Cayman Islands, the company was in full damage control mode. George had been formally removed as CEO, and criminal charges were pending against both him and his daughter. 1 month after my humiliating escort from the building, I sat in my office, reviewing quarterly projections when Mina announced a visitor. "Gregory Archer is here to see you." Gregory entered with a wide smile. "The prodigal client returns," he joked. "Thanks for your patience through all this," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "It's been a chaotic transition." "Worth waiting for," he replied. "Though I must admit, I never expected such drama when I raised those implementation questions." I smiled. "Neither did I." "The board made the right choice," he said, studying me. "Not just for ethical reasons, but practical ones. No one else understood the behavioral economics underpinning our agreement." "That was the problem with stealing someone's work," I observed. "You can take their slides, but not their knowledge." After Gregory left, I walked to the window overlooking the city. In 1 month, I'd gone from unemployed to running the company's most critical division. George was facing criminal charges. Pia was in custody awaiting extradition. My revenge hadn't come from destroying them. It had come from simply letting the truth emerge while positioning myself to succeed where they had failed. That evening, as I prepared to leave, William appeared at my door. "The board meeting went well," he said. "Your division's projections impressed everyone." "Good to hear." He hesitated. "There's something else. The board is considering candidates for the permanent CEO position. Your name is at the top of the list." I looked up in surprise. "I've only been back a month. A month in which you've stabilized our largest accounts, rebuilt team morale, and implemented transparent processes that have impressed the auditors." He smiled. "Not bad for someone who was escorted out by security 5 weeks ago." As William left, I sat back in my chair, letting the news sink in. CEO, the position George had guarded so jealously, the position from which he had orchestrated my humiliation. My phone buzzed with a text from Teresa. "Dinner to celebrate your 1-month workversary?" I smiled as I typed my reply. "Yes, and I might have some breaking news to share." Slipping my phone into my pocket, I took one last look around what had been George's office, the place where he had sat smugly while telling me his daughter was the future of the company. He had been right about one thing. The company did have an extraordinary future ahead. It just wouldn't include either of them. If this story struck a chord with you, hit that subscribe button right now. We've all faced moments when someone took credit for our work or tried to push us aside, and there's nothing more satisfying than seeing hard work and integrity ultimately win. Drop a comment sharing your own experience with workplace betrayal and how you handled it. Remember, success isn't just about climbing to the top. It's about how you treat people on your way there. Like this video if you believe talent and truth always find a way to shine.